Reserve. The root of all our evil, it begins with the Federal Reserve. Hey, yeah, well, let's go back in time when everybody was so proud of America.
I'm Tommy Salmons. This is Year Zero, the show that revolutionizes personal engagement in the world and fortification of your life. Let's get to it. We're brought to you by Fox & Sons, foxandsons.com, the best place to get your BBC. I never start my day with anything less than BBC in my mouth, and I suggest if you like BBC, you go to foxandsons.com. Get that big, bold coffee and put it in your mouth. foxandsons.com. Promo code 0 at checkout for 18% off on any order $25 or more. That's foxandsons.com for that BBC big, bold coffee. Put it in your mouth, baby. And the Mark Claire Show. If you enjoyed Mark Claire with Lions of Liberty, you're going to really dig the Mark Claire Show. Mark Claire has gone beyond the realm of politics to dig into the esoteric meaning of life in all sorts of different avenues, whether it be entrepreneurship, ghosts, goblins, Bigfoot, demonic entities, religion. Mark Claire is diving into all of it, and he's not afraid to tackle any task. So go check out the Mark Claire Show. Thank you, as always, Tom Burton, for the music. And you can find this show and many more at the libertarianinstitute.org. That's the libertarianinstitute.org. That's where you'll find me, Patrick McFarlane, Scott Horton, Keith Knight, Will Porter, Kyle Anzalone, and a host of other writers like Kim Robinson. Go to libertarianinstitute.org and keep track of everything that we are doing for you. All right. I'm here with Mr. Pete Quinones. Once again, it's been a while since we recorded anything. We talk all the time, but it's been a while since we recorded.
Yeah, I think we've seen each other more often. We've seen each other twice since the last time we recorded. So
damn, yeah, it has been a while then. Shit. How have you been doing? How's the show going?
Good, man. Good. Enjoying it a lot. You know, switched it up a lot, doing a lot of history, a lot of revisionist history, a lot of readings of obscure stuff, and really, people really into it. I mean, it's like there was a time when I had a pretty good base of listeners who, you know, were really into it. Now it's like they're just hardcore. I mean, I get the amount of contact I get about people who are like, keep doing what you're doing, do the readings. You know, I read through a whole book that was like 275 pages. It took me like 13 episodes to do it. And, you know, just commenting on it along the way, commenting on essays, doing all these things. And, you know, like I said, it's obscure stuff. Some stuff is some no topics. But yeah, I mean, it's people seem to really, really get a lot out of it and are excited by it. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. I'm enjoying myself a lot now.
That's good, man. I'm glad you found your niche, man, and you're really just dug right in, because I know you've always kind of been on the fringe anyway of the thought. No matter where your mind was, you were always kind of like right on the limits of everything. And so it's nice to see that you're doing well.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, when you asked me to talk about this, I just finished doing a couple readings that I thought were something where we could talk about, you know, population shifts and what can essentially turn into ethnic cleansing, and how it affects cultures and societies. So yeah, I jumped at the opportunity.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you did, man. This is something that it's been on my mind for a while. and I just didn't know how to approach it. And then started seeing Conor McGregor in the news, and they're investigating him, and I was like, wait, what? so I was like, all right, I need to look and see what's going on, and it fit right into the wheelhouse. So let's jump into this. So basically, my summary is that the United States is an occupied nation, and that it's occupied by globalists, and that it has taken a long time for the American people to become aware that the government that is in power sees the world as its governing body, and that it has the authority to govern the world and not just the nation of the United States, which then creates this conflict within the minds of the American people, because the American people are like, well, you're not doing anything for us, the nation that you were voted in to represent. But it's because they were voted into a government that doesn't represent the nation. They were voted into a government that is governing and has the authority over other nations. And so that's kind of the summary I'm working off of here.
Well, yeah, I think the idea that there's this, something like the John Birchers had pushed for a long time, that there were forces outside of the United States that were seeking to put the United States under its power of a one world government. I think that's wrong. I don't agree with that. I believe it's actually the United States government that's doing that, where they want to put the world under its umbrella and under its power. The fact that it is an occupied nation, that this isn't being done by what some would call heritage Americans, the founding stock, that is people who came into the country after the founding. I think that's pretty clear as well. And I mean, I have some theories on why they would want to do that, and it ties into a lot of what we see about, because I think the original thing you wanted to talk about was European migration and immigration, and how, when you look at what happened in Ireland, it was a non-native, I believe he was Albanian, and you ask yourself, it's like, okay, why is there an Albanian in Ireland? And why has he been there for 19 years? Why has he been on the dole for 19 years? Why does he bounce from flop house to flop house? Why do they allow this to happen? And then when you start looking further, you look at Ireland, this historically homogenous nation of Irish, and you find out that their prime minister, their president, is half Indian and gay. And you're like, well, okay, so Great Britain has a prime minister that's not of Great Britain stock, of British stock. London has a mayor. Scotland's leader is from somewhere else. And then you start to ask yourself, you're like, okay, how did this happen? Because when you see all these things happen, especially on these islands, these small islands, but historically, I mean, that have this huge history, this long history, this rich history, you see this, you're like, well, how did this start and why? And it's the how's really important sometimes. Like, okay, how did this happen? But the why is probably what's more important. It's like people want to talk about 9/11. What happened on it? I want to know why 9/11 happened. That's what's important to me. People can talk about hologram planes and missiles hitting the Pentagon. None of that interests me at all. I want to know why these things happened. If it wasn't just upset Muslim terror, upset Muslims, and it was planned from somewhere else, and Saudi Arabia had a hand in it, and if the U.S. government was going to, I want to know why. And when I look at what's happened to the European peninsula specifically, and the British Isles, and what's starting to happen to Iceland, which is something that was a meme a few years ago. And then now Iceland is undergoing the same thing that all these other, you have to ask yourself, okay, why are all of these people who are not Irish, who are not British, who are not German, who are not French, who are not Swedish, why are all these people flooding into these countries? And that's, that's the question.
Well, the funny thing is with Ireland, it didn't start with the Albanian. That was actually a secondary story that came out after the original trouble started. It was a Slavic guy that had migrated to Ireland, and he had killed somebody. And that's what originally got everybody up in their eyes. And then the whole Albanian story where he was going around stabbing kids, that like added on to it. And that just added fuel to the fire, and all these riots took off. So it's really interesting. And this is why I started with the US, because that global ideal, that global model that the US openly represents is what all of these governments are doing. And they're not representing their citizens. They're representing the citizens of the world. And therefore they feel at ease ushering in all these third world nations into their borders, and like basically invading their own nation. And it makes you wonder, like, it doesn't make you want, like, it made me think of the PM in Poland when he was on television, and they were like grilling him about how many Muslims have you taken in, and he's like 0, and he's like, we've taken, and she's like, you're taking no refugees. He's like, no, we've taken refugees from Ukraine in the Ukrainian war, but we have taken 0 illegal immigrants from these Muslim nations. And she goes, but they're refugees. And he goes, no, I made a promise. And then the lady tells him, well, you sound racist. And he goes, well, it doesn't matter how I sound. You can call me racist all you want. I made a promise to the people of Poland and to my family. And my job is to represent my family and my country, not worry about all these other people. And that drives them crazy. And that is one of the biggest, if you look at the biggest enemies of Western nations, it is those countries that grab and hold on tight to that nationhood, that history and that culture and how rich it is, whether it would be Iran or Russia or Poland. These nations are really like clinging to that nationhood, and it's unacceptable to these people.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about the whole Muslim thing. I mean, I have no problem with Muslims. I think Muslims they have their own section of the world where they do things. It's holy land to them. I'm happy with them being there. I don't think that, like, when you look at everything that's happening in Europe, a lot of this violence you see coming from people who came from majority Muslim nations, but like this guy. And then there was a guy in France a couple months ago who ran around a park stabbing infants. And these aren't guys who go to mosque.
Right.
These aren't religious Muslims. It almost seems like back in 1979, we had the Mariel boat lift out of Cuba into Miami. And it was a lot of Cubans. And basically what Castro did was he emptied his prisons and he sent them to America. And Jimmy Carter's like, well, we're going to take them. And I was telling my wife the other day, I was saying, if there's no Mariel boat lift, we don't have my favorite TV show of all time, Miami Vice. Because Miami Vice is telling the story of what happened when all of those criminals came here and basically started organized crime in Miami. I mean, there was always organized crime in Miami, but this was different. I moved to South Florida in 1986, and the amount of shootings that you would hear about, in Miami, it was just off the charts. It was absolutely insane. So I think this is what happened. Everybody talks about how, oh, when you see the boatloads of people going into Europe, it's all 18 to 34-year-old single men. You never see any women or anything. Basically, what you're seeing is I think you're just seeing people. This is the average age of people who are being in jail.
Mm.
And I think a lot of these countries are emptying their jails, and because of certain groups who finance this and want to import these people into Europe to make Europe multicultural, which is the goal. And you have a video you can play, whenever you're ready, whenever you want to. You don't have to play it right now. The goal is that they want to make Europe multicultural. And I think that, I think there's reasons for that we can get into, but the whole Muslim thing is, I think it just happens to be Muslims, and really to blame. I mean, I'm not an Islam apologist. I don't want to be Muslim. I have Muslim friends. There are Muslims that I really like.
Mm.
But I think Islam is an over there thing. I think they have their own section of the world. We should leave them alone. But when you really look at the crimes that are happening, the fact that they're Muslim probably is about blaming Islam for it would probably be like blaming Roman Catholicism for the cartels in Mexico.
Mm.
You just happen to have a bunch of criminals that were brought up Roman Catholic, may still go to confession, may still go to church.
Can I ask you this, because this might be a better way of, like, from my perspective of identifying the issue here. If you look at, like, the tradition, like, just historically here in America, people have self-segregated, right? So you go into Houston, you have Chinatown, and you have some streets that have Korean signs, and et cetera, et cetera. And then you have your black neighborhoods and your traditional white neighborhoods. And this is just how it goes. And I'm wondering if maybe the self-segregation in smaller countries like Ireland cause bigger issues than they would in somewhere like the United States. And so these people are clinging onto their culture, and they're turning this area into their cultural dynamic, while the native Irish are trying to, assimilate them into the Irish culture, and they're rejecting the Irish culture, and it creates this kind of this struggle between the two.
Well, that's going to happen. It has to happen. I have a friend, Keith Woods. He's been on my show. He's an Irish nationalist, and he was one of the big people on Twitter with the whole ban the ADL thing. I mean, he was one of the 2 or 3 people that got that started. But he talks about how, whereas when you look at, like, immigration into Great Britain, Great Britain, because they colonized India, you had Indians coming there, have been coming there for a while. But really, it started with this Windrush ship in 1948 that showed up from Jamaica, and they brought. I mean, okay, so what does that do to, like, the Irish? The Irish are on an island, okay?
Right.
They're basically a Roman Catholic country. I hate to say Roman Catholic is not a term I like to use, because, like, no one in the church uses it. It's a Catholic country. And unfortunately, a lot of Ireland has abandoned their Catholic roots. But the difference here is that since Great Britain's been having people come in for 75 years, this in Ireland has only started recently. This is only within the last 15 years, and it's been basically forced upon them. So that's why when you see a couple things like this happen, where you have a Slav kill somebody, then you have an Albanian attack somebody, you see this reaction. Now, as Carl Benjamin said this week, he said, I don't think there were a lot of middle class Irish people out there setting those fires and stuff like that. There was a lot of hooligans who were were out there doing this. Probably not the best thing to do, but it's bound to happen. You're talking about a country that is homogenous. That is, I mean, it's an Irish country. People think of Ireland, they think of one thing. They think of redheaded girls and, freckles, and they think of guys who really shouldn't be out in the sun too long. And well, what happened? How did you get a gay Indian president? How do you get some of the worst hate speech laws out there? How do you get laws that are being proposed to, if an Irish person's house is too big, taking it away from them and giving it to migrant families, and then just putting them in housing that the government deems to be suitable for the size of their family? So if you have a couple that has a 3-bedroom, it can be taken away from them, and they can just be moved out. How do you have laws coming into effect that they can stop you to look on your phone and check your phone for memes? I mean, like stop and frisk, literal stop and frisk.
And if you refuse to give them your password, they will arrest you.
Right. And how did this, as soon as people started like protesting, and Conor McGregor starts speaking out and other people start speaking out, how did this turn into white supremacy and racism? White supremacy and racism is normally reserved to hurl at people the people who come up with names like that and use names like that, called colonizers. The United States colonized. We came here and pushed out the Indians. Great Britain has gone all over the world, but Ireland has never colonized anyone. Neither do they have a history of like a white pride movement or anything like that. How did this? I mean, it's a playbook. It's a playbook from country to country. They push these immigrants into populations that are, let's face it, the cultures clash. And if these people do not want to adopt the culture of where they're going, if they want to keep their own culture, I mean, you're bound to have problems, and people make excuses like, well, Ireland has Irish people who kill people too, that stab people too. So, what's the difference if it's someone from somewhere else? Because they're not there. They're not from there. What the hell are they doing there? What has a guy been there for 19 years who's added nothing and has only taken? And then he goes on a rampage because apparently he didn't get a check in time. That was the last thing that I read. That may have changed. I read that like 2 days ago. He didn't get his check, his dole check. And then he just goes on a rampage.
Right.
I mean, what do you do about? I mean, why would you? How is that not a problem? How is it not a problem? I mean, there is really good evidence that immigration from people outside the culture moving into other cultures causes the home culture, the host culture, to stop having children. They're actually being replaced. The population is actually being replaced by these people who are basically coming in. And why are they coming in? There's a difference between someone, applying to come to the United States because they think that America is the greatest country in the world. There's tons of opportunity here. They want to come here and start a business. They want to do that and everything. I mean, I'm at the point where I don't even think we should let anyone in at this point. But I mean, at least that is some. When my father came here, my father was born an American citizen. I was born an American citizen. My grandfather was born an American citizen. On my dad's side. When my dad came here, my dad's name was Pedro. He named me Peter on purpose because he came here at 6 months old, and even though his name was Pedro, everyone called him Peter, and he named me Peter because I was going to be an American, and we were going to live like Americans. And that's the way I've lived my life. The way I've lived my life. I've thought about going to other countries, but I don't have a home anywhere. This is my home.
Right.
And if you have people who are coming here or anywhere, especially especially a place like Ireland, but an island where when you think of Irish people, you do not think of a gay Indian, a gay guy from India.
Right.
How is that not going to cause problems within a culture? It is bound to, because you have two cultures that are clashing. You have a culture that's existing like this, and it's going along, and all of a sudden something comes in and distorts it. Yeah. Okay, so what happens after that? I mean, I don't know what else to say. I mean,
well, and we're seeing it everywhere. I mean, we're seeing it in Sweden. I mean, you've mentioned the UK a couple of times. It's happening all over the place, and the people that stand up and defy this multiculturalism, they get demonized, like you said. They get labeled as white supremacists or whatever, and it's like, I don't know, man. Like, part of it is we have traditions and we have cultures, and we kind of want to keep them in place because there's history there. It's the way my grandparents did it and the way my grandparents did it. And that's just the way it goes. But you mentioned that video. I'm going to play it here in a second. I wanted to mention something though. Did you notice the name of the organization? It was a Greek name, like Paeda.
Yeah.
You know what that is?
What is it?
It was a Greek word for aristocratic education. So it was meant to indoctrinate all the youth and propagandize all the youth into becoming aristocratic and leaving behind the like the country roots of Greece.
Right. Well, yeah, and when you think of aristocracy, historically you think of a small group, an aristocratic caste in a country, and the rest of and they usually set the culture. They do this, but here's the thing: is that this is an international organization. This international organization isn't going into countries, isn't going into Sweden to teach Swedes how to be aristocratic and take care of their own people, how to care for their own people. No, you'll hear what this organization does when you play the video.
Yeah. Well, we'll play that right now. I need more practice at the screen sharing stuff.
I use it all the time, so I'm used to it.
All right. We'll have this pop up. Let's take that now. All right. There we go.
Such. As we heard, there are people in Sweden who support Israel and have a deep sense of the injustice of the present situation. It's these people who give hope to those who still believe that things will get better here. One of them is Barbara Spector, a former American who made Aliyah and then 10 years ago, with the help of the government of Sweden, set up a non-denominational institute of Jewish learning with the Greek name of Paideia here in Stockholm. She believes the current wave of anti-Semitism in Sweden will pass and that Jews have an important role to play in a country undergoing profound change.
I think there's a resurgence of anti-Semitism because at this point in time, Europe has not yet learned how to be multicultural. And I think we're going to be part of the throes of that transformation, which must take place. Europe is not going to be the monolithic societies that they once were in the last century. Jews are going to be at the center of that. It's a huge transformation for Europe to make. They are now going into a multicultural mode, and Jews will be resented because of our leading role. But without that leading role and without that transformation, Europe will not survive.
Paideia.
You're muted. All right, so she talks about anti-Semitism there. First of all, I could find no evidence. That's from 2012, I believe. I could find no evidence of anti-Semitism in Sweden at that time. She talks about, she's from America, and she's in Sweden. Let's talk about that. She says that Europe will not survive unless it becomes multicultural. That's just, how is that even true? What basis is she doing? Where? How is multiculturalism going to save Europe? I mean, the thing that destroyed Europe was World War II. World War II destroyed Europe. The West, whatever you want to call the West, has been occupied by a foreign energy entity since World War II. And what you see is, you see people like Barbara Specter Lerner talking about anti-Semitism. And the reason she's talking about anti-Semitism is Jews believe that predominantly white countries are a danger to them because of something that happened in a predominantly white country 80 years ago. So they are flooding, they're doing, I mean, when you look at the organizations and where the money comes from for these organizations that are bringing the migrants into Europe and, you know, anywhere else they possibly can, they're all run by people with Jewish names. Soros money. I hate to bring up Soros because he's like a boogeyman to everyone, but you know, Soros does a lot of this. And when she said, and she gives it away, she says, because we have to make Europe multicultural, there's going to be a rise in anti-Semitism. Well, what exactly does she mean by that?
What caught me off guard, maybe you can explain this to me. She said Jews have to be at the center of this. And I'm thinking, I'm like, okay, are you saying that Jews have to migrate to Europe, or are you saying that Jews have to push migration to Europe? Like, what? Like, I don't understand where she's coming from with that.
I think it means that Jews have to push migration to Europe. The Jews have to be at the center of this. Well, if they feel, well, first of all, historically, for the last 2,000 years, the Jews have been a wandering people. They've been a diaspora people. Show up everywhere, at home nowhere. You know, they go into certain. They went into, one of the most ridiculous things that ever happened was that Jews showed up in Catholic Spain, which makes no sense whatsoever. These are two people who are dialectically opposed to each other. One, Catholic Spain believes in objective truth, and is liturgical, liturgy. The church is the government at the time that they showed up.
Right.
And then you have this people who are intellectuals, rational, which both of those are positives. But then you throw in a third aspect into Judaism, which you see over the last 2,000 years, especially if you read Solzhenitsyn, you read Sombart, you read Selskine, Jewish writers write about this. You can go on the Jewish Virtual Library. And they're subjective in their morality. When you have a very smart people who's very rational, but their morality is subjective, anytime they come up against people who have an objective morality, what's stopping those people from just killing each other on sight? It doesn't make any sense. You cannot exist. You cannot, a people who believe in objective truth and a people who believe in subjective truth and morality cannot exist in the same culture.
Yeah.
And that is the main problem. And I think that when she says Jews have to be at the front of this, well, because Jews really, even though they have now they have Israel to go to if they want to. Not everybody wants to go to Israel.
Mm.
You see, I mean, Owen Benjamin talks about like there's 3 different kinds of Jews. There's the banker Jews, the sodomy Jews, and the pornography Jews, and then like the bagel Jews. The people, bagel Jews just want to be left alone. The sodomy and pornography Jews are the ones who like started the porn business, started Hollywood. All of these push abortion, push feminism, created Bolshevism, created all these things that people who have believe in objective truth it butts up against them. And then you have Jews that just want to be left alone.
Mm.
And I mean, but they're basically a wandering people. So why would Jews have to be at the forefront of this? Because they don't first of all, I think they see all white countries as a threat to them. So the more they can the more they can mix other cultures and mix other colors, they can bring people from Africa, bring people from the Middle East in. It also makes it easier for them to blend in. They don't stand out like they did in Germany. They stood out. I mean, the Berlin Jewish population in the 30s, when you start reading about it in the 20s, they stood out. It was very clear who it was, who was Jewish and who was German.
Mm.
And I mean, I think that's what it is. When she says all this, she says, I mean, she's an American. She's in Sweden. We've seen what's happened to Sweden. Sweden has gotten so bad with cultural rot from all these refugees that they've taken in, that women in Sweden they're discouraged from reporting rapes. They've actually changed the definition of rape, where they'll ask a woman, a Swedish woman, were you raped? I don't know. And then you look at like the gang violence that there have been a lot of reports this year about gang violence, and people will be like, well, there were Swedish gangs. There weren't Swedish gangs just firing into crowds and things like that. They didn't do that because these were their people. These were gangs that were running underground doing black market stuff. These are gangs that are running a drug trade and are shooting people. And I mean, you look at that, then you look at what's happened in Germany, where, I mean, the attacks in Germany are endless. When you look at what's happening in France, I mean, France is, a lot of people just say France has fallen. You have someone like Geert Wilders, who just got elected in the Netherlands, basically on an anti-immigration policy. And you see all these right-wing parties rising up all over Europe. I mean, in Spain, the mayor of, I think it was the mayor of Madrid, outlawed this week praying the rosary in public. And people are like, what's going on? So you have like the Vox party, which is the far right party in Spain. I mean, one of their leaders just got shot in the face in the street a couple weeks ago. They're talking about in Germany, the second most popular party in Germany now is a far right anti-immigration party. They're talking about second most popular party. They're talking about just making them illegal.
Mm.
Just making them illegal. So, I mean, why?
And who's being demonized is Russia, because they're outlawing the LGBT movement. And it's wild. Like if you demonize or if you outlaw the left-wing party, then you're on the wrong side of history. But if you outlaw the right-wing party, mum's the word. Everybody's silent. Everybody thinks it's perfectly normal. Well,
Putin, and I've done some episodes with Dr. Matthew Raphael Johnson, who is he's who he is, Orthodox. He's Orthodox, and
I'll look him up. I haven't heard of him.
Orthodox nationalist. He's really, he wrote a book. He's like the only person who's written a book on Putin's political thought in English. It's the only book on Putin's political thought in English. And when you look at what he's done and why they hate him so much, well, I mean, in the 90s, the country was after the Soviet Union broke apart, the country was basically sold to the highest bidder. Had all these companies come in who were just buying things up, and there were oligarchs all over the place. And Putin came into power and put the oligarchs to heel. There are videos of him walking into meeting. You'll see he'll be walking into like a company, the boardroom of a company, and he'll just be telling them, he'll tell them, this is how it's going to be now. He goes, this company is Russian. He goes, we're kicking everyone, all the foreign people out of here. And it turns out that those oligarchs were all Jewish. And it's the same thing that happened in Ukraine last year when people start talking about the oligarchs. There were 7 oligarchs in Ukraine who had their own, basically, fiefdoms. They were like mayors over us. They were all Jewish. And this is why Putin is, it's also, a 500, 600, 700-year-old blood feud for the way Jews were treated in Russia for centuries. And once you start reading that history, you're like, well, what are you complaining about? I mean, it's not like you were just sitting there being Jewish and not doing anything. It's not like they were like, we don't like the way these people pray. Well, no, there were reasons, and that's exactly what happened with Putin. That's exactly what happened with Ukraine. And when you look at all the people in the State Department in the United States who are really constructed and designed this whole thing in Ukraine since 2014, they all come from a 12-mile radius of Lvov in Ukraine. Their families all come from, like, their ancestors all come from a 12-mile radius of Lvov in Ukraine. And it's like, it's a feud. This is like centuries old. This is like the Khmelnytsky uprising. They're still upset about the Khmelnytsky uprising from 450 years ago.
Right.
And and that's what this is. And when you look in this country and you see who's pushing, the open borders and in this country, it always comes back to the same group. It always comes back, and it's hard to, it's not all of them. It's like E. Michael Jones says. E. Michael Jones says, when you say the Jews, you're talking about the political Jews.
Yeah.
But you have to be able to say it. It's like when people say, oh, well, Germany invaded Poland in 1939. All of Germany didn't invade Poland.
Right.
But you have to be able to say, I mean, if you were going to qualify everything if you were going to qualify all of it, it's like last year, nobody had any problem demonizing the Russian people. So many people have no problem demonizing the Palestinians and lumping them all together. But do that with the Jews? Watch out. That's the only group you're not allowed to. They act as a group. They have, 2,000 activist organizations in this country that are in Jewish self-interest. But as soon as you say, well, what's up with the Jews doing this? No, that's one person. Barbara Lerner Specter, you're only allowed to judge her because she's acting as an individual, even though she's speaking for the Jews.
Yeah. What's that Dave Chappelle joke? If they're Italian, it's a mob. If they're black, it's a gang. If they're Jewish, it's a coincidence.
Yeah, it's a coincidence. But yeah, it's so when you look at when you really study immigration into Europe, which seems weaponized. And let's not even call it immigration. Let's just call it like refugees, weaponized refugeeism into Europe. I mean, it comes back to one group. And what did Barbara Lerner Specter say? And this is over 10 years ago. And how many more people have poured into Europe from African nations and Middle Eastern nations who are from a completely different culture than the European culture? That's what people cannot get through. Libertarians, man, all cultures are not the same.
Mm-hmm.
Just because you know somebody who came here from Pakistan and started, and opened a business in your neighborhood, and they're really cool to you, that does not mean that everyone can do that. And this country is very different when it comes to that too. People have a tendency to come here and to blend in a little better. But that's not the way it is in Europe. In Europe, you're talking about a much older culture than the culture here. So when they get pushed into a culture like that, and you have a people who are just for centuries have been doing it the same way, even if they haven't been doing it the same way for centuries, there's still that residue of how this is how we do it. There was I saw some TikTok video of an American Black girl. She went over to Germany, and she was complaining because they were telling her, she went into some business and she started complaining, and they're like, you do not raise your voice here. And she was like upset that oh, I can't raise my voice here. It's like, well, you're in another culture.
Yeah.
These people, this is not how they do things.
Right.
So what happens when you you introduce people into that culture who have no intention of adopting that culture, of becoming Germans? They're just Syrians or Yemenis in that culture. And they're bringing their Syrian and Yemeni culture, and that's it. But you're going to have incredible problems. And I do not see why this. I mean, you get called a racist for bringing this up. You get called an anti-Semite, even though Jewish people will tell you, Jewish leaders will say, yeah, this is our plan. This is what we want to do.
Mm-hmm.
This is what we want to do. We want to destroy the white race. You have Jews who say that. Our goal is to destroy the white race. Well, no, you have to judge him as an individual. That tweet has 25,000 likes.
Yeah.
Okay. What?
Yeah.
And I'm supposed
25,000 individuals. Yeah.
Yeah, and then it's like, well, no, you have to judge each of them as an individual. Oh, but have somebody refer to themselves as a National Socialist in the United States and have 6 friends who do that. They don't get judged as individuals.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
one
or
of
Christians or anti-abortion Christians. I mean, there's an attorney general. We have an attorney general who openly talks about how he has relatives that died in the Holocaust. There's no way that I could ever, as a Jew, there's no way you could ever say I would target anyone who's religious. Yet he has the FBI going after Catholics left and right all over this country for protesting abortion clinics, for a 15-year-old boy ending up in a Telegram chat where he's just acting out what other people are saying, and it turns out that Telegram chat, it's going to turn out that everybody in that Telegram chat was an FBI agent egging him on,
right,
just as it always does. The Terror Factory by Trevor Aronson, we know this.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to somebody who's Jewish, who's saying something like Barbara Lerner Specter said right there, I've showed that video to a lot of people, and people I know who've been sharing that video for years. So that video has been around for years.
Yeah,
say that is a video that makes people who were formerly like, oh, I would never even use the term Jew, where they're just like, wait a minute, what the hell is going on?
Yeah.
What is she talking about? Because I remember I did an episode on a book called The Authoritarian Personality. It was commissioned by the Jewish Association of America, and it was 4 guys from the Frankfurt School who wrote it. And it was basically how to tell whether somebody had the potential to become a fascist. Did they go to church? Did they care about their family? And this one went directly to Leo Frank, the Leo Frank case. Do you think that people who hurt children or molest children should be punished beyond the law? Like, is like, yeah. And they came out with this book, and they have this whole list of how you might be a fascist. And people are like, well, that's just a book. That's just a book they put out. None of that, what does that mean? And I'm like, because everything they talked about in here came true.
Well, Mein Kampf was just a book.
Well, I mean, it's it was an election. It was an election year screed, and really, it was. I mean, you know what's funny is in that whole book, he never once talks about violence towards Jewish people.
I've never read it.
He doesn't talk about violence towards them. No, but yeah, he says he's like, look what they've done to what they've done to Weimar. But you know, when you look at like, you know, and here's one that's like, I mean, this is a punchline and like a meme. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion.
Mm-hmm.
People are like, well, that's ridiculous. I mean, there are some people who think that Benjamin Disraeli wrote that. there's evidence that Benjamin Disraeli wrote the Protocols, and people are like, well, that's just anti-Semitic hate. I'm like, okay, maybe, but have you ever read it? Everything that they said that they wanted to do in there came true. You realize that book was in the 1920s. The book was widely read, just like Henry Ford's The International Jew.
Yeah.
These books were widely read and discussed openly in newspapers. And then World War II happened. And what happened? You're not allowed to bring these things up anymore. When somebody like Barbara Lerner Specter says that Europe has to become multicultural or won't survive, and that the Jews are going to be responsible for this, and they'll be blamed, and there'll be a rise in anti-Semitism because of it, and then you see that this actually all happened, am I insane?
Yeah, right. Well, and then you think about the rise of anti-Semitism. Some of that is based upon the cultures that they are importing into Europe are anti-Semitic cultures.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
so that doesn't help.
Well, yeah, and that's really where, you know, the monster you created comes back to get you. They decide that they're going to send these cultures into Europe and into the and what they do is they go into the United States and they start promoting, you know, oh, Christianity's old fashioned, people don't need to go to church anymore. Then you basically in the schools, in the universities, you're teaching, oh, white people are, you know, colonizers, white people, they're always to blame for anything that happens. And then what happens? Like a lot of Americans have become Zionists who aren't Jewish because they went to evangelical churches. So you stop the young people, you dissuade the young people from going to church, and now they're not getting that education. But they're going to college and they're learning that white people are oppressors, but you're not teaching them that Jews aren't white. So when they see what happened in Israel, what's happening in Israel, in Palestine right now, they see white people attacking brown people, and they see them as colonizers. And then when that happens, all over everywhere that they sent people who are, you know, I mean, Islam, Johann von Leers was a National Socialist in Germany who ended up moving to the Middle East. I think he moved to Egypt, and he converted to Islam. And he said that Islam was a dialectical antithesis to Judaism. Well, you just imported people who grew up, even if they're not religious, culturally, they're the dialectical antithesis to who you are.
Right.
Did you think this was going? I mean, it doesn't work out good for them, but it also doesn't work out good for Europeans.
Right.
You know, Europeans have to put up with this now too, even though they're not. Even though, you know, even if they're not Jewish, even if they're just, well, they have somebody from a completely alien culture who's come in and has distorted that culture.
How much of this is based upon the religious beliefs of Orthodox Jews and the belief that the Jews are God's chosen people, and that they were giving the directive to subdue the earth? Like, how much of it comes back to a religious background?
My opinion is, and I could be wrong, people can disagree with me on this, is that the Orthodox Jews have less to do with this than the atheist Jews.
Okay.
Yeah. What's funny is when you look at when somebody in America who's Jewish says something, that's like anti-Christian or anti-American, or talks about racism, talks about how white people are racist, talks about this. Usually, if you go and check their early life on Wikipedia, they're usually not, if they're Jewish, they're usually not religious.
Okay.
It seems like it's more these, what I would term the sodomy, like the sodomy Jews, the ones that are like really into promoting a culture that is degenerate. And you don't really see that from the Orthodox. I mean, the Orthodox, you may have people who are more Zionist in the Orthodox circles, but you don't really see. I mean, you see some of them. You see, like, I mean, a rabbi owns Pornhub, but that rabbi is not an Orthodox rabbi. He's a Reformed rabbi, and a Reformed rabbi, they don't even believe in God. So it's like you sort of have to start separating them out when you want to start breaking stuff down like that. A lot of the atheist Jews in the United States, if they are pro-Israel, it's not because they don't believe in God. So they don't believe God gave them that. They don't believe that the temple needs to be rebuilt. They don't believe anything like that. They just believe, oh, those are my people over there. A lot of them believe, well, if I do something wrong here, I can escape there, which there's a lot of that in the world. I mean, Israel is really bad about extraditing criminals who make it there. Yeah, I think there's a division there. I mean, and then you will see like the ultra Orthodox in Israel who are completely anti-Zionist. They will get like their butts kicked by the IDF, and but also when you look at Israel, like, I mean, is Benjamin Netanyahu Orthodox? No, he's not. He doesn't even believe. So you have like this hyper right wing party, the Likud, who, I mean, they don't believe in God. They don't believe. I mean, they say that God gave them that land, but they don't believe in God. So how does that work?
Yeah, see, because I've always heard that there was a thread of Zionism that believed that it was their responsibility to engage the world in such a way that paved the way for God to come back, for right, the Messiah. And so I never could figure out how much of it was. It's kind of like breaking down Muslims, which I talked to you about a little bit on when we were talking about doing this. It's like how much of this is faith-based, how much of it is political, how much of it is, authoritarianism. It's just hard to parse. It's such a messy like world to get involved in.
Have you heard of a term, Tikkun Olam?
No.
Tikkun Olam is, and I don't know that whenever I hear it being spoken of, it's always by the atheist Jews. Jews are going to be responsible for shaping the world. They're going to be the ones who are going to inspire the world. They're going to be the ones that are going to build the world in the way they want to. Again, going back to what I was talking about, how Catholics and Jews, how that would butt heads is, do you want the people who are shaping the world and shaping society to be hyper intellectual, hyper rational, and subjective morally? That's a really bad recipe, man. That's a recipe that I think that's a recipe that brings you free porn. I mean, dude, there are algorithms that you could stop. Porn could be removed from the internet completely. You try to play a song, you try to sing a song on YouTube, algorithms pick it up and shut you down. Porn could be gone. Why is porn free? Yeah, well, because it's damaging. It's one of the things that they said in the authoritarian personality. They said, how are we going to stop these people? We're going to stop them through eros. And what is eros? We're going to over-sexualize and we're going to hypersexualize them. One of the best ways they can do that is through porn. And then you look and you're like, feminism. Well, what has feminism done? Taking the woman out of the home, lowered birth rates of the native population, pitted men against women. It shouldn't. I mean, given progressives really good BDSM porn like The Handmaid's Tale, I mean, that's all I can think that is. That it's just it's terrible writing and it's terrible TV making and terrible filmmaking and it's a joke. What else has what abortion? I mean, when Roe v. Wade got overturned, 200 Jewish organizations protested, saying that abortion is a Jewish value. The ADL said that. Well, I mean, what?
Yeah.
What? I mean, okay, and what else? Bolshevism? Yuri Selskind in the Jewish Century, right there, he's a Jew, wrote a book celebrating the 20th century, Jews in the 20th century. What did he do in that book? He showed that the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia wasn't Russian. It was Jewish. And it was a bunch of Jews who lived in Russia and who didn't live in Russia, who went to Russia, took over the government, and immediately started executing Christians. Why? For 400 or 500 years, payback for 400 or 500 years of a pogrom here and a pogrom there. I mean, the Russian government, Solzhenitsyn writes about how the Russian government would just give land to Jews and they wouldn't want to work it, so they'd lease it out to Russians. They would give them like farm equipment and then they would just sell it and keep the money.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Solzhenitsyn writes about this. So, I mean, what have they, E. Michael Jones wrote a 3-volume set called The Jewish Revolutionary Spirit. And he basically starts at the cross and comes forward. And he shows how basically every revolution in the West, every revolutionary movement, especially in the last couple centuries, was started by somebody who's Jewish. So we haven't even talked about the spiritual aspect of this.
Yeah.
John chapter 8, where Jesus tells them, if you believed in me, you'd be of my father, but you're of your father, the devil. And then Matthew, where when Pilate's like, do you want Barabbas? Do you want Jesus? Do you want Barabbas? They say, give us Barabbas. Let Jesus's blood be on us and on our children.
Mm-hmm.
And if you know anything about Jewish culture, that means on all their generations.
Right.
So
yeah,
you have
that they were pissed off at Jesus because he wasn't a political revolutionary.
Yeah. So we haven't, like I said, we haven't even touched the spiritual on this. So it just always seems like, going back to immigration, because that's what this is about. It always seems like there's let's just give it to an individual. The individual who's usually pushing this is either Jewish or they're being backed by Jewish money.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to ask yourself why. And to summarize, I think it's because they don't want to see any predominantly white countries anymore, because a predominantly white country, the predominantly white countries have historically, they can't blend in. They're always the outsider. They're always seen.
And there's also the aspect of payback, because prior to the Holocaust and the murders that took place, Hitler gave other countries the opportunity to take them as refugees, take the Jewish out of Germany as refugees, and every country of the West said, no, we don't want them.
Oh, Hitler went even further. When the National Socialists came to power in 1933, they outlawed every other political party except one, the German Zionist Party. The German Zionist Party and the National Social and the what became what's called the Nazi Party, they existed side by side. And then Hitler came up with this plan. I think it was Eichmann who came up with this plan. It was called the Havara Agreement. And the Havara Agreement was a plan to relocate Jewish population, to not relocate, but to send Jewish populations to Palestine. There are pictures out there of people in SS uniforms in Palestine in the 1930s helping them set up their government.
Yeah.
And the Havara Agreement, not only was it, see, a lot of people be like, well, he was going to let them go, but he would keep their wealth. What he told them was, he said, you're going to, before you leave, you're going to invest your money in German industry, but when you get there, you can sell, you can basically divest and get your money back. I mean, he did everything he could to get Jews into Palestine. I mean, you want to talk about the Balfour Declaration? How about the Var Agreement? He was trying to help them. Eichmann spoke Hebrew. Eichmann was known as a Philo-Semite in the Jewish community in Germany. A lot of people believe, and Ron Unz believes this, that when they hunted him down in the late 1950s in Argentina and brought him to Israel to face trial for crimes. Wait a minute, why did they bring him to Israel if his crimes were committed in Poland and Germany and on the Eastern Front? Why
Right.
was he tried in Israel?
Right.
They kept him in a glass case in the courtroom, and they would only allow him to say certain things, or else they would close the case. Ron Unz is somebody who believes, Ron Unz, who was born Jewish and learned about all of this, he believes they kept him in that glass case to keep him from saying, I've been with you guys all along. I speak Hebrew. I've tried to do everything I could to help you guys set up your government here. Why are you doing this to me?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, people just don't know this history. And a lot of people believe that the Jews, I mean, there's stories of like the Patria ship was a ship. There were ships where Jews showed up to Palestine and they were like, we don't want to stay here. So we're going to go back. And the ship would leave. And like the Stern Gang, which was a Zionist terrorist organization, just like Haganah was, just like Irgun was, there were all these Zionist terrorist groups. They would blow these ships up to or bomb them to scare Jews. They would actually commit terrorist attacks and attack Jews in Europe to try and scare Jews to go to Israel.
Mm.
They tried to send a bomb. They tried to send the bomb to FDR. They tried to send the bomb to Truman. I mean, these people are. Those people who founded Israel were friggin' nuts, man.
Yeah,
and they were out of their minds. There's a documentary that they made where they're bragging about going in and murdering these people. They're saying, "Oh yeah, there were Arabs there. Sure, we just went in and we killed them." I mean, I don't know. I don't know. I when you bring it back to like the immigration and everything, especially in Europe, I mean, they've basically done everything they can to destroy Europe. Europe's only chance now is that they need to remove those people from their population.
Yeah.
They need to deport them all. They need to send them back. And to have the balls to do it on the international stage, to be like, we don't care how much you sanction us. We don't care anything about that. I mean, how cucked is Germany that they allow their ally, the United States, to blow up their pipeline?
Yeah, that's crazy.
How cucked do you have to be? And just think that's how bad Europe is.
Wasn't that something like 60% of their natural gas for the winter or something like that? Like that's where the German people were getting their heat.
Mm-hmm.
That's insane.
I mean,
it's just sacrifice. It's just sacrificing their own people to keep, with friends like that, who needs enemies? You know,
I mean, look at America's greatest ally. What do they do for us? Oh, imagine what that region would be like if they weren't there. What was the region like before they went there? Come forward from the last year of the Crusades, come all the way forward to when the first Jewish settlers started showing up around 1880, 1890.
Well, I mean, wasn't it war torn? I mean, because you had the Ottoman Empire and all these other, like,
yeah, but they normally just left. I mean, but they weren't warring amongst each other. That's the thing is, that area was not warring. They weren't these skirmishes. I mean, there would be skirmishes, but that happened everywhere. It happened all over Europe during the Middle Ages. Happened in Germany, happened in Germanic tribes, happened in Spanish tribes, everywhere. But it was the Jews who brought the tension to there when they, it's like, oh, we're going to, what was it? I can't remember what his name was, but he went to Palestine. He was one of the original Zionists. He went to Palestine and he came back and he told Herzl, he said, hey, there are people there. And Herzl's like, yeah, I know. And Herzl, in his early writings, was referred to them there as as their brothers. And we just have to go there and get along with our brothers. And then the plan changed somewhere along the way. And you still have people saying, oh, a land without a people for a people without a land, saying that there was nobody there. There's just over 1 million people there when there were at least 1 million Palestinians there, or Arabs, whatever you want to call them. I mean, they're all Arab. In 1947 and 48, when the UN put in their declaration.
Yeah.
And they literally ethnic cleansing. When people hear ethnic cleansing, they automatically think of murder. Like, no, you're basically cleansing people of their ethnicity. What they're doing to Europe right now with all this immigration.
Yeah.
They're getting rid of, there's no more German people. There's no more French people. There's no more Swedish people. How is that not ethnic cleansing? And Barbara Lerner Specter said it right there. Unless we make it multicultural. Well, what does multicultural mean? Is you're going to have more than one culture. So you're going to have competing cultures. And to me, the most violent culture is going to win. Especially when you import a culture that has no problems with violence.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I don't know where to go. I don't know why people can't see this. And I certainly don't know why pointing this out, makes you, puts you on a list somewhere. Because it's obvious to anyone who's just going to be honest with themselves.
Yeah.
But people don't want to be, people can be honest with themselves too. I mean, do you know how many people I know in the libertarian sphere who know this but would never say it? Never speak it out loud.
I can think of a few that I would think would know it.
Yeah, they all know this. They won't say it out loud. People. I'm not, and not even the libertarian sphere. Let's put that aside. It's like normie sphere, like normie right wing sphere. They know this stuff. They know that they question things. They question historical events. They may have even studied this stuff. They can't say it out loud. I just can't not.
It reminds me of James Burnham's Suicide of the West. That's what I keep coming back to in my mind. The more
it really is his best book. It really is his best book.
It's by far his best book. I love that book. I think I have it on audio, and I think I've listened to that thing about 7 times. I'll just love that book. I go back to it all the time.
So many great quotes in there. So many quotes that I like, that I have on my phone, like in files. on my computers that when I'm writing something, if I want to use a footnote or I want to use a quote, I'll throw that in there, especially about liberalism. So many great quotes about liberalism, and not even about, like the shitty form of liberalism we have now, but like classical liberalism.
Right.
Really good quotes. I mean, the things he points out in that book, he wrote that, I think it came out in 64, probably started writing in 62 or 63. Just everything came true.
Yeah.
There's nothing in that. Like, people can look at the managerial revolution and they can be like, well, he got this wrong, he got that wrong, he thought the Nazis were going to win. Well, when he wrote that, everyone thought the Nazis were going to win, so shut up. But he got this wrong, he got that wrong. Okay, yeah, he did. The Machiavellian, he writes the Machiavellians. The Machiavellians is just the greatest treaty on power. That's probably one of the greatest treaties on power that's ever been written. But when you want to see what's happening day to day, when you look at the world, when you live in the United States, when you live in the West, and you look around and you're like, and your history, what the West was like 100, 150 years ago, and you're like, what the hell happened? It's all in Suicide of the West.
Yeah, and it's timeless, like you're saying. I mean, you can look around, you can see it, but it really it pulled the scales off my eyes to show me that it was the natural evolution of the ideology of liberalism, that it was all going in this direction. There was only one direction for it to go.
Yep. Yeah. And I recorded today with a Politicrat, and we talked about that. We talked about how the 60s was, I believe in that history happens in cycles. And I believe like the 60s was really the start of a new cycle, because the 60s is really when you see just the abandonment of objective truth. Objective truth just starts going. People start jettisoning it, and it just really starts going downhill. And it's just gotten worse and worse since then. I'm probably one of the only people who believes that when it comes to ethics and when it comes to morality, going off the gold standard was one of the biggest factors in all of that, because it just inflation since then has just blown everything up. And when you have inflation, if history tells us anything, and we can look at other places where inflation happens, normally you start seeing debauchery and degeneracy happen.
I might have to have you back on to do a show on that.
Yeah, the gold standard was, I mean, man, Nixon, and it wasn't something that Nixon wanted to do. Putting it on, letting anyone who would have been president, if anyone who would have won that the gold standard would have been gone. Yeah. And Nixon had a lot of power. He was probably the greatest president of the 20th century because he cared about the country, and he understood power and how power should be used. But that was one of the things that there was no, it didn't matter who ran for president. If LBJ would have ran for, you would have got it. It didn't matter. Just didn't matter. It was going to happen.
I think we'll name that episode "The Ethical Consequences of Inflation." I like that.
Man, I did an episode on the Weimar Republic with Michael Jones, and once you start, there's some good books. I have a good book over there on the Weimar Republic that is actually celebrating the Weimar Republic. And there's actually a documentary made by the same people who wrote that book. It's called why am I missing it right now? Voluptuous Panic, and it sounds like a lipstick or something like that. But on Odyssey, I think it still might be on YouTube. I forget what it's called. I have a link to it on my phone, but there's like a 40-minute documentary based on it. Weimar was, you think today is bad? What they were doing then, there's a reason why, the boot boys were able to come to power.
Yeah. They call up
It-
authoritarians once it gets so
yeah,
bad.
it just there was no one, you know, the church wasn't stepping up. In Germany, so Germany had so many faiths at the time, and also at that time, if you really understand that time, so many people were getting into were abandoning classic faiths and looking into other things, more modern,
Right.
modern things. But
Occultism was really big back then.
yeah, it wasn't as big. It wasn't as big with the Boot Boys as people. Mark Clare did a good episode with Thomas on occultism and the Boot Boys, and it wasn't as. I mean, like, Mustache Man outlawed outlawed tarot cards and like all that stuff. Like,
yeah,
like,
I'll listen to that
yeah.
episode. That was a good episode.
Yeah, because he was just like, I mean, he's a Habsburg Catholic, so I mean, he didn't have time for any of that stuff. But yeah, when you start seeing, and here's the thing about inflation too. In the short term, inflation will get people wealthy. I mean, think about it. How many boomers do we know that bought a house in the late 70s and sat on it and watched it go up 10 times in price?
Mm-hmm.
And they sold it and they were sitting on, $500,000 or something like that. But what, my theory is that the richer a society becomes, the more degenerate it gets. And I think that you saw that in Weimar up until the point where, the infamous wheelbarrows full of money.
Right. They were burning money because it was worth more as fire than it was as currency.
Yeah. So yeah, it's but yeah, that's some really bad stuff. One of these days, that Voluptuous Panic book there's some nudity in it and everything. And one of the guys in my private group did a version of it where he covered it up so that in case I wanted to read it on my show and everything, maybe I'm going to try to do that one of these days, because that book is incredibly disturbing, especially when you realize that they're what they're celebrating.
Yeah,
it's incredibly disturbing. I mean, he talks about, famously Magnus Hirschfeld, the first person to do transgender surgeries, and the clinic, his sex clinic, which was like a sex clinic / gay brothel, basically.
I've heard you talk about him before.
Yeah, it's I mean, he actually made famous the term racism.
Oh,
the
really?
the term had existed before, but he really, he made it famous through some of his writings. But yeah, there's a thread that runs through all of this that we're just dealing with.
Yeah.
And immigration is, there's a book out there that I know a lot of people hear it and they've heard it, and it's almost on the level as of my struggle, is Camp of the Saints.
I've never heard of it.
Yeah, it's a book from the 70s, and basically what he describes is mass immigration coming into Europe and destroying Europe. Don't look for a print version of it. You're not going to find a print version of it under like $200-$300, but you can find PDFs everywhere. And if you can't find a PDF, I'll give you one.
Okay.
It's really, I mean, it's basically a bunch of it's basically takes place in France, and basically like India is emptying itself out and going to Europe. And it's a story of just how they realize once they get to a certain point that Europe has fallen. And this is Raspel writing this in the 70s was, it's almost prophetic. It's just, but it's written very well too. He was a really good writer, and but it tells a story. And now people read it then and they're like, I guess this could happen. Now people read it and it's like, oh wow, this is like current events.
Yeah. That's wild when you run into books like that too.
Well, Yaki's Imperium. That's why I do a lot of episodes on it. Basically, he predicted everything that we're going through, and he wrote that book in 1948.
One of the first book I had that experience with was Future Shock by Toffler. I read that. I sat down. I probably read that in probably like, I don't know, it's a 400-page book or something like that, but I read it in like 2 days. I just could not put that book down.
Yeah, there's a lot of books out there, man, but there's a lot of books they don't want us to read, and but there's a lot of Spengler, Oswald Spengler is a really good, is really good to read. Like his book, he has the Decline of the West, Volume 1 and 2, and I mean, it's those are long books, but if you read his book Man and Technics, which is 100 pages. It's 100 pages. It's just basically a condensed version of Decline of the West. He's another one. What's funny is he gets it so right of how cultures go through stages, that not only have a lot of people on the far right read it and studied it, a lot of people on the far left have read it and studied it. And they're like, they use it more as like a workbook almost. So, you get to do that when you have power.
Yeah, I guess so. Well, all right, man, we'll plug away.
The Pete Quinones Show, PeteSubstack.com, and I'm part of a group of us put together a little fraternity, a little 501c8 called Old Glory Club. And it's a bunch of us, the Prudentialist, Paul Fahrenheit, the Distributist. I'm leaving so many people out. Raging Mandrill, Red Hawk. And it's just basically a club where we have a Substack. We write 3 articles a week. We do 1 live stream a week. We put out a lot of bonus content. And it's basically celebrating Americana, celebrating America, talking about, obviously it's called the Old Glory Club. It's looking back on America and saying, we had it right one time, and we need to get back to it. So the Substack's great. People love the Substack. My wife reads every Substack that comes out because they're always good. I mean, you'll have everything from, like, the Prudentialist wrote a Substack today talking about how if you're on the right, you have to be careful what you say online now these days, even in your messages and everything. And I wrote the last Substack I wrote for them was about the great Brooklyn barbecue swindle of 2018, where Brooklyn tried to say that they had the best barbecue on the planet in 2018. And I actually went up to Brooklyn and had their barbecue, and how shit it was. So I wrote about that. And then I talked about some places in Atlanta and some places here in Alabama that you can get some much better barbecue at. And, I've been to Black's in Austin and everything. So,
Lockhart, man.
Yeah,
barbecue capital of the world.
Yeah, I've had barbecue everywhere. But so it's like we do everything from, like, we don't do any like really hardcore politics, but you'll get movie reviews and stuff like that, book reviews, and our streams are a lot of fun. We did a stream last night where we just talk about the stuff from all the headlines from the week, and we make it serious, but also try to make it funny. I try to be the comic relief on that as much as I can, because it can get a little too serious sometimes, but we always end up having a good laugh and everything. And those are becoming pretty popular live streams. I think we had like between 200 and 300 people yesterday. So that was and I also do a live stream every Sunday at 3 p.m. Central, 4 p.m. Eastern. And I'm getting between 300 and 400 people showing up for that on a weekly basis. And
Cool.
Normally on that, I'll pick a topic or two to talk about, but it's mostly just me bullshitting with the people in the comments and answering questions. And every once in a while I have a guest on. I've had Bird on, I've had Aaron on. I haven't had Carr and Paz yet, which would be nice. But I had Lucas Gage on, who's become since the whole Israel-Palestine thing jumped off, become a really big voice on Twitter. And yeah, so yeah, the live streams. I used to not do live streams all the time, and now it's like I really enjoy doing them because the people, the interactions with the people in the comments is really good. And then I have a very, very well read audience, and some of the people in the audience are much more well read than I am. So that's actually pretty awesome too. So
Yeah, I love whenever I start getting suggestions, like book suggestions from my audience. I'm like, all right, cool. Yeah. I'll read that. I'll check that one out.
Yeah. Or podcast suggestions. That's where like all the podcasts I listen to now are like suggestions from people who watch the show.
Oh, wow.
People who listen to the show. Yeah. It's like Stone Choir is like my favorite. They're a Lutheran podcast, but they're like everybody I know, it's myself as a Catholic. I know Orthodox people who listen to it, evangelicals listen to it. They're a lot. They do some amazing breakdowns of even when I don't agree with them, I enjoy it because they're putting a lot of information out there, and you can tell that they've put in the work to do the research.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, all right, man. I got all kinds of stuff here. I'm taking notes as you're talking, so I'm going to check out all this stuff. So, all right, I'm going to stop the recording.
All right, man. Good to talk to you.